la 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 Shalom, my dear friends. Shalom. Today, the 28th of Tammuz of the year 5776, corresponding to the 3rd of August of the year 2016. I hope you can both hear me and see me. And just as soon as I do hear from those of you who are checked into the Azamra online Bet Midrash, then with God's help I will begin today's series of classes. And please do let me know, Shalom Adonit, Shalom Catherine, Shalom David Elazar, and Shalom Shoshana. Please let me know if you can hear me and see me, and if so, then I'm going to, with the help of God, begin today's class. Shalom, today the 28th of Tammuz of the year 5776, corresponding to the 3rd of August of the year 2016. And today we continue now with our studies from the end time visions of Daniel. And we're going to continue today looking at chapter 2, at the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, as Daniel set forth the dream before him, and then Daniel went into the interpretation of the dream. And in our last session, we took a look at the writings of Rabbeinu Saadia Gaon, and what was of particular interest, it seems to me, is Rav Saadia Gaon's interpretation of the bottommost part of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar, with its shins and feet of iron and the toes of partly iron and partly clay. And I'd just like to read the concluding words of the interpretation of Rav Saadia Gaon that I had reached in the previous session, before going on to look at a comment of the very outstanding Torah commentator Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra, who was a younger contemporary of Rabbi Moshe ben Maimonides, and who takes account and takes issue with some of what Rabbi Saadia Gaon has told us. As we heard, we had seen how Rav Saadia Gaon had explained to us that the statue essentially symbolized the Malchut, the successive empires, and first came the empire of Babylon, and then came the empire of the Medes and the Persian, the twin empires, where the Medes were the heart and the Persians were the two arms of silver, followed, according to Rav Saadia Gaon, by the belly and the lower torso, in Hebrew the me'ayim, which were of bronze and symbolizing Greece, who were harsh as bronze. And he mentioned Alexander of Macedon in that section. And then he finally focused on the toes of iron and clay, and we saw how the Rav Saadia Gaon had difficulty with reconciling the simple apparent meaning of the dream with our tradition that Ishmael rule at the end of days. And that is why he explained to us that the toes were of iron and clay, representing respectively Edom and Ishmael. Well, now let us take a look at the Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avram Ibn Ezra, who was in Spain, and who obviously had to hand the interpretation of Rav Saadia Gaon. And here's what the Ibn Ezra has to say about the interpretation. He says, yes, the bronze is referring to Greece, and let's remember that we're not only talking here about ancient Greece in the centuries before the Common Era, long before Alexander of Macedon came on the scene and began to spread Greek culture. The Greeks already had a sophisticated tradition of philosophy, of literature, of thought, and it was Alexander's mission was to spread the Greek culture all over the world and to try to conquer the world. So yes, the Ibn Ezra tells us here that he does accept that the bronze corresponds to Greek, who began, and the spread of the Greek power began with Alexander of Macedon, who came after Daniel, and Daniel will subsequently, in later visions, explicitly bring in the role of Greece, as we shall be seeing. And now he quotes the Gaon, Rav Saadia Gaon, who had been writing over 100 years and more before him. He says that the Gaon says that the fourth is the Malchut of Aram, as we discussed the other day. And this Malchut is very powerful and is identified, he says, with the kingdom of Ishmael, and he says he cannot find any explicit reference to this in the book of Daniel. And he writes here that the Malchut of Ishmael will be greater and longer than the empires that were mentioned. If we do think about the Malchut of Ishmael, the Malchut of Ishmael really began with the lifetime of Muhammad and spread rapidly in a mission of conquest, which, as Maimonides writes for us in his epistle of Yemen, his epistle to the people of Yemen, Igeret Teiman, Islam was not only a religion, but one that wanted to establish a political empire. And Ibn Ezra here carries on quoting from the writings of Rav Saadia Gaon, and he tells us here that the kingdom of Aram, which would appear to mean Rome, as we suggested the other day, is like iron, and that the Gaon, Rav Saadia Gaon, said that the clay referred to the kingdom of the empire of Ishmael. And he also says that do not be surprised that that Daniel's in the vision sees Ishmael compared to clay. But Ibn Ezra says, well, the Malchut of Ishmael is no less than the empires before, but it's just this is the order in which the vision unfolds, where we have the successive levels. It begins with the gold, and after the gold comes that which is on a lower level, that which is the silver. After that comes the bronze. After that comes the iron, and finally the clay. But the Ibn Ezra, having given this summary of the opinion of the Rav Saadia Gaon, he says, Eile divrei tohu vavohu. I'm quoting now from Ibn Ezra on our verses in Daniel. He writes this in a lengthy comment on verse 38 of Daniel chapter 2. He says, Eile divrei tohu vavohu. This is words of emptiness and devastation, because this is not a proper logical order the way he orders it. And the testimony of what Ibn Ezra is saying, he says, is when Daniel refers to the empire of Persia as being less than you, Nebuchadnezzar, just like silver is less than gold. And Daniel says about the clay that it is very fragile. And now says Ibn Ezra, his own interpretation is that the clay is part of the kingdom, the empire of iron, as is explained that there were toes of iron and toes of clay. And that, says Ibn Ezra, means that part of this final fourth empire before the redemption, before the rebuilding of the temple and the restoration of Israel, this will be a mighty empire, but the part of it will be mighty and part of it will be fragile. And we see that this is all one empire, says Ibn Ezra. How can it be divided up between Ishmael and Aram, namely Rome? For Ishmael, he says, has not yet ruled over Rome, and nor do they have the same Torah, namely the same system of beliefs. And since this is the case, we can truly wonder how it is that Daniel did apparently not refer to the empire of Ishmael. Why were there not 5 kingdoms? So he's detecting this difficulty within the words of Rav Sadia Gaon. And now Ibn Ezra says, let me explain. Know that Daniel, who was king of Greece, and who was the one who killed Darius II, Darius the Persian, namely the son of Ahasuerus and Esther, which spelled the end of the Persian Empire conquered by Alexander. He too, namely Alexander, was king of Aram. And Aram itself is identified with the people mentioned in the Torah at the end of the portion of Balak in Numbers as the Kittim. And this, says Ibn Ezra, is also explained by Yosifon, Yosef ben Gurion, Yosifon the historian, in his history. And in Daniel, we see later on in chapter 11, verse 30, it speaks about the ships of the Kittim. And as I shall explain, says Ibn Ezra to us, as I shall explain to us, the Targum in book of Numbers, speaking about when at the end of Bilam's prophecy, he speaks about the fleets coming from the Kittim. He says these are the Romans. And Ibn Ezra expresses surprise that the Targum should identify the Kittim with the Romans, because the Kittim are among the children of Yavan, the children of Greece, as we find in Genesis chapter 10 in the genealogy of the children of Noah. The children of Yavan are Elisha and Tarshish, Kittim and Dodanim. Well, these various nations, Elisha and Tarshish, refer to Mediterranean nations, Italy and Spain. And indeed, what he's telling us here is that there was a joining of the culture of Greece with the culture of Rome, which is well known. Although Rome was an independent power, nevertheless it was profoundly subject to the culture of Greece. And I can tell you, as a former student of Latin and Greek classics, just how very much this was the case, and has been perceived to be the case ever since. So this is what the Ibn Ezra is telling us, that he wants to tell us that the third empire, the empire of Nechoshet, is actually the empire of Greece and Rome joined together. Namely, if the kingdom of Nechoshet, the bronze, is Greece, then the Malchut, the empire of Aram, is to be identified with Greece. And if so, it would be in Daniel's prophecy, the Barzel, the iron at the end, is exclusively identified with the Malchut of Ishmael. And because the empire of Persia destroyed the empire of the Chaldeans, namely of Babylon, and because the empire of Greece destroyed the empire of Persia, now the kingdom of Ishmael, which is identified with the iron, is unable to destroy the kingdom of Greece. I think this is very significant. He seems to be saying, Rabbi Avram Ibn Ezra, he seems to be saying now that the Rome and Greece are the third level, and these obviously continue until today. We only have to look at the style of architecture in Washington D.C. and the nomenclature of the Senate and the Congress to see many associations between the modern powers and ancient Roman Greece. So he says Ishmael, the metal, is unable to destroy the kingdom of Greece. We have seen, indeed, historically, just look back for hundreds and hundreds of years since the Middle Ages and onwards, the efforts of Ishmael working through out of Turkey to westwards into Hungary and into trying to get into Europe. They were not successful. And he writes here, we see that until today there are places where Ishmael does succeed in overcoming the kingdom of Aram, and other places where Ishmael are themselves conquered. And that is why, according to Ibn Ezra, part of this fourth Malchut, the fourth empire symbolized in the toes of clay and of iron, part of it is fragile and broken, part of it is very powerful. So we of course bear in mind that Daniel is giving us the prophetic take on great swathes of history, and Daniel living hundreds of years before the destruction of the Second Temple, which is already nearly 2,000 years ago. Daniel living approximately 2,400 years ago was looking at a great sweep of history, but already, according to both Rav Sadia Gaon and Rabbi Avram Ibn Ezra, these two classical commentators, Rav Sadia Gaon, a Gaon in the 10th century, and Ibn Ezra, an outstanding Torah scholar, commentator on the five books of Moses and the whole of the Tanakh. They're both saying that there is an intrinsic interrelationship between the kingdoms of Aram, which is identified with Rome and its civilization coming from Greece, and the culture of Ishmael. They are kind of interconnected, but fighting against one another. And here I think we can see how Daniel's Ruach HaKodesh, his Holy Spirit, is able to give us the perspective from which to see what is actually happening in our times, where we are reaching a new level of confrontation between Edom and Ishmael. If we go back very far back to the times of the Roman Empire, neither the Greeks nor the Romans really succeeded in conquering Arabia. And the tribes in Arabia who are mentioned in various parts of the Tanakh, mentioned in Tehillim, and mentioned in the prophets. They had presumably some kind of a transmission from the Abrahamic teaching, but they went off on their own tangent and they developed their own cult centers, such as in Mecca. And it is known that Muhammad sought to somehow bring the Arabian Peninsula more in line with Abrahamic monotheism in the way that he saw it, and subsequently tried to spread his empire. So we see that since the 600s, really, there's been the growth of the Ishmaelite empire. Now, if we look at these commentators one after the other, I'd already in previous sessions mentioned the Holy Zohar, which we believe intrinsically was brought into the world with its teachings in the time of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It was perhaps edited and redacted up until the 1300s, when it was brought out into the light of day by the well-known Rabbi Moshe de Leon. And Moshe de Leon had the agreement that his writings of the Zohar were authentic from Rabbi Yitzchak de Min Akko, a medieval a Makubal and outstanding Torah authority accepted by Torah scholars everywhere today. Now, the Holy Zohar gives us the tradition. This is found at the end of the portion of Va'era, the second portion of Exodus in the Zohar, at the end of Va'era, that at the end of days Ishmael will dominate the world. And here we've heard from our commentators on Daniel different interpretations of how this will be. And it seems to me that we can see elements both of the interpretation of Rav Saadia Gaon and the interpretation of Ibn Ezra working together. Rav Saadia Gaon was concerned, where is Ishmael in all this? And said, well, Ishmael and Aram are the different toes of the feet. Well, we can actually see how this has been working in the last 100 and more years with the Western encroachment on Arab oil. The Western powers, basically, with the successive collapse of the Ottoman Empire, took over what became the world's great oil-producing areas until pretty much our times, although their grip has radically been loosening. But we see an intense strategic, financial, and political interaction between the Western powers, who would be identified with Edom, and with the Ishmaelite powers, who would be identified in some shape or form with the rulers of the Arab countries. We've seen the strategic relationship reflected, for example, in the massive gifts that are given by the Saudi royal family to the British royal family, which, as it were, cement the strategic financial and economic links between their countries and their interest groups. So we do see this, but at the same time we see today the tremendous fragility of this alliance. If we really go back even further, there have been those who have theorized that Islam itself was secretively set up and encouraged by Roman Catholic priests. This is, to some may sound very far-fetched, but if you do some research on the internet, you can find some fascinating literature on the subject. So there again, we see this interaction between the two powers of Edom and Ishmael. But what we're also beginning to see today is, quite amazingly, while the the Western nations and the Western elite who would be representing Edom are extremely well entrenched in the worlds of finance and of industry and innovation, and we do not see tremendous contributions from the Arab nations to anything except oil and, at the moment, the export of terror in the world, which is the way of Ishmael. It's within this context that the concluding portion of Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream is so important to us. Here is the section that fills us with hope that as these two powers of Edom or Aram and Ishmael are holding sway over the world, is precisely then that the great Even, the stone, comes forth and is cast not by hands of human beings. It's not a sort of human missile. This is a new level of the revelation of God, and this alludes to the word Even in Hebrew consists of the two words Av and Ben. And Av and Ben together are the influence of Jacob, who is totally bound up with his father, the Creator. And it is this impact of Yaakov, who is called Mishom Even Ro'eh Israel. This is the verse in the Torah. From there is the stone, the shepherd of Israel. This stone is Jacob, who is totally bound up with his father, namely with God. Yaakov, who represents Zeir Anpin, is bound up with the supreme God. And this is the stone, this is the Even that comes forth not by human agency. It comes forth now to destroy all of the empires. The prophecy is very emphatic that all of these former empires, as they will be when the time of our redemption comes, all of them are to be swept away completely. And just to conclude now with chapter 2 of Daniel, we see that in verses 41 to the end of the chapter, King Nebuchadnezzar, hearing the account of the very exact dream that he had dreamed, and hearing the interpretation which had also known during the dream, and he had forgotten both of them, hearing both of them, the dream and its interpretation coming from Daniel, caused him to fall on his face before Daniel and to want to worship him like a god. Well, Daniel obviously refused to accept this because in verse 47, without Daniel actually having said anything to the king, but it was obvious to the king from Daniel's stance of shying away from being regarded as any kind of god. The king, verse 47 of chapter 2 of Daniel, says, "It is true that your God is the God of gods and the master of kings, the Lord of all kings, who reveals the secrets, and you were able to, who made you able to reveal this secret." Well, now, here is a very crucial part of the ministry of Daniel, that everywhere he goes, with all of the world tyrants that he has contact with Nebuchadnezzar, with Nebuchadnezzar's later successor, grandson Belshazzar, and later with Darius the First, of king of the Medes, who put Daniel into the lion's den. in all of these associations, what comes out of the end is the Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name that comes forth from Daniel's revealings, the inner hand of God's providence working in all of our lives. And then the king at the end of the chapter gives Daniel these gifts, and he put Daniel over the whole kingdom of Babylon, and Daniel requested that the king should bring his companions into the king's service, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who had taken part through their prayers in this magnificent sanctification of God's name. And with that, we come to the conclusion of this amazing chapter, and as we will come later on to the ensuing chapters of Daniel, we shall see how this single chapter encompasses all of the visions, gives us the entire perspective within which to see the more specific visions that will be coming up. And with this, we conclude this section of our studies today on Daniel chapter 2. So we'll now be taking a short break, and after the break, we shall resume with our study of the Mishnah. Shalom again, and now we come to the Mishnah segment of today's Kollel. Today, the 28th, just one moment please, my friends. Shalom, today the 28th of Tammuz of the year 5776, corresponding to the 3rd of August of the year 2016. And today we come to the Mishnah in the 3rd chapter of the tractate of Sanhedrin. We had in chapter 1 of Sanhedrin heard about the composition of the various levels of Batei Din, the rabbinical Bes Din, rabbinical courts in the people of Israel. And we had heard about the Bes Din of 3 Dayanim, 3 judges to pass judgment over cases of monetary disagreements. We'd heard about the Sanhedrin Ketano, the small Sanhedrin of 23 members dealing with capital cases. Sanhedrins of 23 could be sitting in cities up and down the land of Israel, and as long as the Sanhedrin was existing in Israel, the Sanhedrin of 23 could also, Sanhedrins of 23 could also sit outside of the land of Israel. And in chapter 2, we went into a digression from the subject of the Sanhedrin to deal with the other two parts of the establishment of the people of Israel, the priesthood and the king. And the Sanhedrin has the authority of the Torah, has the authority of smicha, of laying on of hands, literally, namely ordination, as we've seen stretching back to Moshe. The kihuna is a hereditary office accessible only to the children of Aaron, the male descendants of Aaron and their families, and the third element, the melucha, the kingship, was promised to King David and his descendants, but as I mentioned, a person that had the authority of the king is seen in the eyes, has the power of a king through his power over a particular territory, is also regarded as a king. Well, having gone off on that digression about the powers and the competence and the conduct of the high priest and the king in chapter 2, now in chapter 3 we come back to procedure in the Batei Din, the rabbinical Bes Din, the rabbinical court. And we're going to be dealing more or less with this subject till the end of the tractate, till the end of Sanhedrin, all of which mainly deals with procedure of different levels of the courts, the Batei Din, in different kinds of cases. And in our present chapter, we're going to be dealing with issues relating to a court of 3 Dayanim, a regular Bet Din that was dealing with monetary laws. And we should be dealing with the whole way in which the court is constituted and the way in which it comes to its decisions. As I mentioned in a previous class, the king himself was empowered to judge people and sometimes could take exceptional measures even beyond what follows the Torah law in order to maintain order within the country. For example, where the king saw a need, and so too if the great Sanhedrin saw a need, they could decree death penalty on people who were subversive influences, even though there were not the requisite, number of witnesses, two valid witnesses, and there had not been the proper warnings given to the individual. Nevertheless, in exceptional circumstances where need was seen, the king and the Sanhedrin could detain people, imprison people, if necessary, execute people, or give people lashes. But here in Sanhedrin, we are mainly dealing with the way that the judiciary of the people worked in ideal times under the independence of the people of Israel in the land of Israel, but also worked along the same or parallel lines in the in Babylon and the other countries of the people's dispersal, where the organization of the legal system was similar. In our modern societies, it is the political power that holds sway that normally is responsible for the judiciary, the judicial system. It is assumed in contemporary government that the judiciary will be appointed on some level by, if it's the monarch, or by the parliament, or will be supervised by them. This is not the case with the people of Israel. With the people of Israel, the judiciary are co-opted from the great mass of true Torah scholars in the nation. And only one who is competent in the Torah law is able to function as a dayan in anything but the simplest of monetary cases. A dayan is expected to understand the entire written Torah, to understand the entire oral Torah, to be able to use his mental, intellectual powers of deduction, of what is called sfara, logic, the logic of Torah argument, hekesh, the comparison of different cases of law. He has to be able to understand how the laws are applied in particular cases. Well, now, the Torah system does not know of having one judge to hear a whole case and decide the case unless the two sides of the dispute are willing to submit it to a single adjudicator. But this is not the preference of the halacha. The preference of the halacha, even in the simplest monetary dispute, is to have a panel of 3 judges. Now, if the question was, well, you purchased so much wheat and you underpaid, all we need is 3 people who are expert in the correct market price of wheat to determine the result of to determine the way the dispute should go. But when it comes to intricate questions about the ownership of properties and the renting and leasing of properties, the sales of properties, when it comes to people who give loans and take loans, who don't repay loans or partly repay loans, if the creditor lost the documents, all kinds of cases like these require competent dayanim, of whom it would appear that there were very many in the Torah world when the people of Israel were living as an independent nation in our land. And this continued for centuries in Babylon and other centers of traditional Torah Jewish life, be it in France or in Germany, in Poland, and be it in Iraq, in Morocco and other countries where there were many people constantly studying the Torah on a very profound level. So the normative Torah city has already a bet din that has been established. If need be, one can call together three people and say, look, the two of us have a dispute between us. Would you kindly sit here and listen to what we both have to say? And if they're competent dayanim, the case can be determined by them. What is different in the Torah system from the way it works in most contemporary societies, where the judiciary is under the established government of the country, is that if there is a dispute in contemporary society, then the parties have to turn to the courts through the proper channels. You have to open up a file. You have to make submit your papers. Under the Torah system, it is up to the toveah, the person who is suing for whatever he is demanding, to turn to the bet din, and the bet din will call the person against whom he is making his claim. And but intrinsically, in a town, in the town square, somebody who had some grievance could call three people together who were competent to judge and say, "Look, I'd like you to be the judges." Well, we'll see the very important a qualification to what I just said. But let us now begin on the first Mishnah of chapter 3 of Sanhedrin. Dinim Mominus. We are back to the laws of Mammon, the laws of money. Bishloisha, with three judges. With this we have already heard that for simple monetary cases, for lower level financial cases, you have to have three judges. Now, I erroneously said a moment ago and started qualifying that the person suing can choose the judges. He can't. Here the Mishnah tells us how the constitution of the court will be. Ze boirer loy echod. This one party to the dispute will choose for himself one judge. V'zeh boirer loy echod. The person against whom the suit is being brought may choose for himself one other of the judges. Ushnehen boirerin lohen oid echod. The two of them, the Toveah, the person making the claim, the demand, and the nitba, the person who is being sued, the two of them jointly will then choose the third judge. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. The whole system is designed to let people come out of it with a good feeling. The good feeling is produced by the fact that the Toveah, the suitor, is choosing a judge because he feels that this judge will look sympathetically on his side. The person who's being sued is choosing a judge who will be presumably more sympathetic to his side, and hopefully, according to Rabbi Meir, the two parties to the dispute will be able to choose and come to agreement on the third judge, who, according to Rabbi Meir, may be supposed to have some sympathy for both of them. So when this panel will come to their final decision after hearing all the claims and counterclaims and examining the evidence of the witnesses, after this, the goal is that both sides to the dispute will feel that they have been heard and that their arguments were considered and that the judges saw that the arguments of one were more sound than the arguments of the other. Well, the second opinion in our Mishnah about the constitution of the Bet Din is that of unspecified other sages. V'chachomim omrim. Others, as against Rabbi Meir, say, Shnei adayonim boirin lohen oid echod. It is the two judges, each chosen by one of the two parties to the dispute. It's the two judges who will choose for themselves a third to sit with them, and because the presumption is that their choice of the third will be more impartial, because although each one of the judges chosen by one of the two parties is going to have some partiality to his party, he's still an independent judge. He's required to examine things as impartial as he can, and by the two of them coming down on a third judge, the sages say that this way the judgment will come out in the most satisfactory manner. The Mishnah continues, Ze poisil dayonoi shel ze. The one side of the dispute is entitled to disqualify the judge chosen by the other side. It should appear to mean, look, I don't want him to be the judge, you'll have to find somebody else. Ze poisil dayono shel ze. Divrei Rabbi Meir. The other side, the other party may also disqualify the judge chosen by the first party. This is the idea of Rabbi Meir, that each one may disqualify the judge chosen by the other. What exactly does it mean to disqualify the judge? How do you disqualify a judge? A judge is disqualified, and we should be hearing more about this later in this chapter, just as a witness is disqualified if he has violated one of the prohibitions of the Torah and has not repented. He could also be disqualified on some other grounds if his Israelite lineage is questionable, if it is thought that he is descended from one of those who are forbidden to enter the assembly. So there are various grounds upon which a judge could be disqualified, but the way it comes out from Rabbi Meir's words, it sounds as if it's arbitrary. One could disqualify any other judge chosen by the other side. This is not the case. When it comes to the halacha, a person is, if he is sued by somebody to Bet Din, is entitled to say, I'm not willing to submit myself to the judgment of this Bet Din. I suggest we go to a different Bet Din. When it comes back to our Mishnah, to the disqualification of judges, as against Rabbi Meir, who says each can disqualify the judge of the other, Hachomim Omrim Emosai, when may one side disqualify the judge chosen by the other? Bezman shemevi alehen ru'oyo, at a time when he is bringing against them a proof, shehein kroivin, that they are related. If there is a family relationship between the judge or a witness to the person, that judge or witness is not considered to be impartial. So they're having some family relationship. We will hear later what are the close family relationships would disqualify a person serving as a judge or a witness. But you've got to bring a proof that they are related, oy psulin, or if they were invalidated. Avol im oyu kesherim. However, if they were kosher, if the judge chosen by the other party was kosher, oy mumchin, or if they were mumchin, if they were experts, they were conversant with the law and how to judge, eino yochol lefoslan, he is not able to invalidate them. Well, now, having spoken about the ability of each side to invalidate a judge of the other side, our Mishnah now comes to a related point. Zeh poisel Edov shel zeh. This one party to the dispute has the power to invalidate the witnesses of the other. V'zeh poisel eidov shel zeh. The other side may disqualify the witnesses of the first one. Divi Rabbi Meir, the words of Rabbi Meir, as if a person could arbitrarily say, I don't want that witness. The Hachomim, the other sages, say, Mosai, when can one side disqualify the witnesses of the other side? Bisman shehu mevi aleihem ro'oyo. At a time when he will bring against them a proof, shehein kerivim, that they are relatives, near relatives, oy psulim, or if they are invalid because of having violated a Torah commandment, because of their occupation in life, as we shall be hearing later on. Avol im oyu chsherim, but if the witnesses of the other side were ksherim, if they were pure and acceptable to the court, eno yochol lefoslan, the one side cannot disqualify the witnesses of the other side. So until now we've been speaking about somebody who is going to a bet din, but it is not necessarily in every case of a dispute to bring it before a bet din. The Torah tells us at the beginning of Parashas Shoftim in Deuteronomy that we should establish courts in all of our gates. One of the great problems of contemporary procedure in the secular courts is the huge numbers of cases, the limited numbers of judges, the incredible delays, not to speak about the procedural and bureaucratic delays, all of which discourages all but the wealthiest actually engaging in litigation. But in the way it's supposed to run from the Torah point of view is that you have to put shoftim v'shotrim b'kol she'orecho. You have to have judges and police to enforce their decisions in all of your gates, namely in all of your cities. But not always is it possible to find a arbitrator between two people who have a dispute. So this helps us to understand what Mishnah Bet is talking about. Omar loy ne'emon olai abo. If one person who is being sued, somebody has a claim against him, and he says to the person making the claim, ne'emon, believable to me, is abo. I accept that Abba, my father or your father, my father will be a reliable judge, even though, according to the halacha, the father cannot be a judge in a bet din because he's a close relative. Nevertheless, a person could say, I will accept his arbitration. Ne'emon olai ovicho. Acceptable to me, believable to me is what your father will say. Ne'emonim olai shloisho ro'ei vokor. Acceptable, believable to me will be the arbitration of 3 shepherds of oxen, 3 cowboys. The cowboy, the shepherds are generally considered to be not the greatest experts in Torah, far from it. But if a person could, if a person wanted to, he could, according to this Mishnah, agree to accept the arbitration of one of these characters, even though they are not known as a rabbinic adjudicator. Now, if a person had made such an undertaking to the party against him to accept such a one as a judge, Rabbi Meir Omer yochol lachazor boy. Rabbi Meir says he is able to go back on himself. He can say, look, what I said before, I no longer want that, I don't accept that, I must go to a proper constituted bet din. V'hachomim omrim, the other sages say, eno yochol lachazor bo. Once the person committed himself to accept the arbitration of somebody who was not on the level of a qualified bet din, he can no longer backtrack. He has to go with what he accepted. Well, now, in the halacha, we have a procedure called Kabbalas Kinyan, the receiving of an acquisition, where in order to affirm a person's acceptance of a particular thing that's being put upon them, as here, the person has to lift up into the air by a height of a handbreadth or more some item. Often it could be a handkerchief or something, and symbolically this today is an action that is signifying that he of his consent agrees to this. So the halacha would be that if a person had made Kabbalah's Kinyan, he had gone through this act of acquisition, binding himself to what he had committed to, he could no longer go back on himself. Well, a similar discussion is in the second part of this Mishnah Bet. In the Bet Din, one of the foremost sanctions to ensure that people tell the truth is that they are required to take an oath by the name of God. And this is an extremely serious matter, which unfortunately today people fail to understand just how serious and awesome it is, because making false oaths has become something quite commonplace. But in the ideal world of Torah law, one of the great sanctions in Bet Din to ensure that the party against you is telling the truth is that you could require them to take an oath. So our Mishnah continues, Hoyo chayov lachaveroi shivur. If a person was obliged to his chaver, to the other party, to the case, to make an oath, it could be somebody who had been guarding somebody else's deposit, or some other item, if he was a shomer sochor, shomer chinam, a guard who was receiving a reward, or a guard who was not receiving any reward. In different circumstances, he might be required to make an oath, which is a very serious matter. And now the party that was entitled to have him make the oath says to him, look, Dor li b'chayei rishecho. Take an oath for me by the life of your head, that is as you say it was. This expression, take an oath to me by the life of your head, that is not a shivu'ah, that is not a formal oath by the name of Hashem, but it carries some serious implications. The person is swearing to the other side by the life of the first person's head that the thing is as he says it is, and if he was lying, God forbid, he could suffer major problems with his head, and that is his whole life. So the person is suggesting, if you don't want to take the oath by the name of God, then take this neder, durli, make a neder, an oath. Not if you don't want to make a shivu'ah, take this oath by the life of your head. Rabbi Meir says, yochol lachzor boy. The person who, even if he said, okay, I'll take that neder, he can still go back on himself and change his mind. But the other sages say, Eno yochol lachzor bo, he cannot go back on himself. Well, now in Mishnah Gimel, we come on to the grounds upon which either a judge or a witness could be disqualified from the halachic procedure. Ve'elu hein apsulin. These are those who are invalid, possul. Now, the Mishnah does not even mention the vast category of people who had violated a Torah law. If they had violated one of the prohibitions, for example, if despite due warning they had eaten meat and milk, or they had worn shatnez, not to speak about if they had committed some more serious crime in the realm of morality or of a murder or any other case like that, they are called a rasha, somebody who is wicked. And the Torah says, do not make a rasha, a wicked person, into a witness. So the Mishnah doesn't even mention this. Our Mishnah comes to another series of disqualifications which are not because people have done something that is against actual Torah law, but because on one level or another they have violated a rabbinic enactment. Hamasachik bekuvyo, somebody who is playing with dice, kubyo, a cube, dice. If his occupation in life, as one often sees in the coffee houses in the Middle East, people endlessly playing games of dice and the like, often with money involved. That is not considered to be a respectable occupation, and such a person would not be qualified if that was his whole life's occupation, to serve either as a judge or a witness. He's a gambler. Hamalve beribis, one who takes, who gives loans, malve beribis, receiving interest. There is a biblical prohibition to give loans. Now, this would apply both to the lender and the borrower. If somebody borrows money and pays interest, he's also guilty of violating this commandment. So this is a Torah occupation, a Torah prohibition, but it's also set about with many rabbinic prohibitions as well. Mafriche yonim, people who put pigeons to flight. One of two possible interpretations given by Rav Ovadia of Bartanura here. One is that they are taking bets on which of pigeons in some kind of competition is going to get further fastest. Another interpretation is that these are people who have their seductive pigeons which they send out near to somebody else's dovecot, and their pigeons or doves, they tempt the pigeons from the other person's dovecot to come off with them to the owner of the pigeon's own dovecot. So he's getting, he's not actually stealing with his own hands pigeons from other people's dovecots, but he's tempting them to come into his own. So that is also against rabbinical law, and is considered to disqualify him from serving as a witness or a judge. For soichare shavias, people who were making a trade in sabbatical produce. The produce of the land of Israel in the sabbatical year, the 7th year, is given to eat and enjoy. It is not given to make money out of, to do trade in. And the people who were doing that, they are considered to be disqualified from serving as judges or witnesses. Omar Rabbi Shimon is now going to further define the meaning of people who trade in sabbatical produce. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was living at the time of the intense Roman persecution, where people were being required to pay heavy taxes in terms of percentages of their crops to the Roman authorities. So Rabbi Shimon takes a look at the history of this prohibition of trading in sabbatical produce. But the chila hayu kairin oison oisvei shavias. Initially, they used to call these people that collected sabbatical produce. Anybody who was collecting sabbatical produce more than his own personal needs would be considered to be disqualified. But later on came the occupiers, Misherabu ha'anosim, when there was a increase in the numbers of the anosim, the people who were using power and intimidation to extort money from the farmers. Chosru likroison seichare shavias. The people who would be disqualified were those who were actually trading in the sabbatical produce, but not if they were forced to take from the sabbatical produce to pay off the occupiers who were extorting taxes from them. So Rabbi Shimon is actually telling us a leniency about this under time of occupation, that giving sabbatical produce to one of these people would not disqualify the person. Omar Rabbi Yehuda and Masai. Says Rabbi Yehuda, when are all of the above disqualified from serving as a judge or a witness? Bisman she'ein lohem umanus Elohi. If they do not have a trade or a profession besides that, if they spend their whole time playing with dice or betting over pigeons, etc., avol yesh lohen umanus shelohi. But if they had a main occupation was not one of these above, then they would be kosher, they will be permitted to serve as witnesses or as judges in the Bet Din. So with that, we bring to a conclusion for today our class in Sanhedrin, chapter 3. And with the help of God, I'll be back in just a few moments with more to share with you today in Torah Inspiration.
Ay, 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 ay,
Shalom again, and back now to our studies for today and to the third segment of our studies on Sundays, Mondays, Wednesdays and Thursdays in Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, in the principles of Torah law through the study of the Mishnah, and now some inspiration from the Torah. And we had begun a couple of days back the teaching of Rabbi Nachman in Likutei Moharan, his seminal work, Likutei Moharan, in the Chelek Arishon, the first part of this two-part work in the teaching of Tetvav, the hidden light. And we had started by studying from the Kitzur Likutei Moharan. This is a work that was prepared by Rabbi Nachman's Talmud, his student, Rabbi Nosson of Breslev, and it is a synopsis of each of the major discourses in Likutei Moharan, bringing out essentially the practical spiritual pathway that Rabbi Nachman is teaching. And in the section that we studied the other day, we had the invaluable piece of advice about the first step in all of this, which is to elevate our faculty of fear, our innate fear, our natural faculty of fear, to its source, and to understand that what we need to fear and be in awe of is only God Almighty and not the things that actually do frighten so many people, from wild animals and ghosts and tax officers, police officers, muggers, terrorists, and so many other things that people are afraid of. All of these, said Reb Nachman, are a clothing for the fear that God puts through the whole creation in order to bring people to fear and know Him. And if people elevate their faculty of fear to its source, that means that they are judging themselves, judging their behavior, their attitudes, their character traits, and successively bringing them into line with the teachings of the Torah. Obviously, if a person is violating a Torah commandment, he is not afraid of the King of the universe, who sees and watches everything, and how could he do that? If a person is not aware of God all the time through their devotions, they are at some measure farther away, or even farther and farther away. And the pathway is to bring our actions, our character traits, and our attitudes into line with what the Torah prescribes. And this is done through the process of introspection, of what in Hebrew is called cheshbon nefesh, the calculation or the assessment of one's own soul, one's personality, one's person. And in Reb Nosson's précis, his abstract of this teaching in Likutei Moharan, Chelek Aleph, Part 1, Teaching 15, the hidden light, he tells us now goes off on a similar track, elaborating what he told us in the section we followed the other day. One who wishes to have a taste of the light that is hidden away must put great effort into as much hitbodedut, as much secluded prayer and meditation as possible with God. And here in the following section, Reb Nosson gives us a most important insight into what hitbodedut is. One might think, from visiting some of the grave sites of the tzaddikim, where many people who seemingly are trying to follow the teachings of Rabbi Nachman go to pray, one often hears howling and screaming and tears. But Reb Nosson here in this section gives us a different perspective on hitbodedut, where he says a person must be constantly judging himself, sitting in judgment. We are currently studying the laws of the Bet Din in our study of the Mishnah, and here Reb Nosson explains to us Reb Nachman is advising us to go through the process of judgment on oneself, judging all of one's activities, all of one's deeds, if this is the proper way to behave, if the proper way to act in the face of God Almighty, who is giving the person so many favors all the time at every moment, who is providing one's sustenance. The person himself must examine his ways and judge himself, as it says in Psalm 112. Let him assess his ways with judgment. And one has to bring everything in one's life under this scrutiny of one's self-examination. The person himself must be judging himself over all his different involvements and activities. And he says, through this, the person will be able to remove from upon himself all of these fears, phobias, and be saved from all of the fallen fears. That is to say, he will no longer need to fear or be frightened of any officer, any high-ranking individual, no evil beast, or robbers, or anything else in the world. Only from God Almighty shall he be in awe and have fear. And through this he will elevate his innate faculty of yir'ah, fear and reverence, to its source, namely to the level of da'at, knowledge and awareness. He understands what is the source of the thing that he had fear of through his enhanced da'at, his knowledge and spiritual awareness. And he will then come to the level of having complete da'at. This is the main purpose of the whole Torah, to bring us to da'at, to know God. You shall know today and bring it into your heart. Isaiah chapter 11, the earth shall be filled with the da'at, the knowledge of God. This is the goal, to come to complete knowledge of God. And then the person will know and understand before whom it is necessary to be in fear, namely to have fear and revere the glorious name of God alone, and to reach the level of what is called yirat haromemut. There are two levels of fear of God. There is a level of fear of God where people fear God because of God's power to punish them, decreeing matters of life and death and injury, illness, livelihood, and so on. So the person wants to stay on the right side of God, on the good side, because of their fear of God's punitive power. But that is not the ideal. That is called, in Aramaic, the yiro tator, the lower yiro. But the upper level of fear is better translated in English by the word reverence. The person is in awe of God because of the supreme power, might of God, and one is just awed and in wonder at God. And this is called the yirat haromemut, the awe of God's exaltedness. And through this, the person will come to attain an understanding of the revealed Torah. Now Reb Nosson is taking us through the steps in the spiritual pathway which will lead us to Rabbi Nachman's promised goal of having a taste of the infinite light. He says that when we will start with this practice of hitbodedut, then we shall come to an ability to understand the revealed Torah, that is the Bible and the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral Torah, the Mishnah and the Talmud and the Halacha, and that is the next step on the way to attaining the hidden light. Because the more we know and understand the Torah, the more we're going to come to humility, to understand just how little we understand and how little we know. The more we integrate into ourselves, into our awareness, into our minds, and into our hearts the supreme wisdom of the Torah, the more we are going to be humbled by our fragility, by our ignorance, by our folly and our other faults and blemishes. And when a person comes to true shiflut, true loneliness, which does not mean throwing yourself aside and despising yourself, it means understanding with all our greatness and glory what a tiny piece we are in God's, what an infinitesimally small piece we are in God's great endless kingdom. When we come to the true shiflut, through this the person will come to prayer with surrender and fervor before God. Because when we understand our own lowliness, we understand that we are completely dependent upon God, and we understand that our whole destiny depends upon God's compassion upon us. We will certainly offer our prayers, understanding that God wants us to pray as part of His cosmic repair. So when a person comes to this level of prayer with fervor, with true devotion, the person is negating all of the person's material being at the time of prayer. And when a person is offering prayers to God without any self-serving interest, and a person does not imagine that he or she themselves are anything before God, but the person negates all of their independence and all of their materialistic physicality, as if the person has gone out of the world, is no longer there. Like it says in Psalms chapter 44, for your sake, O God, we are slaughtered all the day. In other words, we slaughter ourselves on the altar of complete surrender in prayer. When a person does this, through this, the person comes to an apprehension of the secrets of the Torah, the hidden mysteries of the Torah, which is the hidden light that is going to be revealed in the future. And this, the key to accomplishing all of this, is based upon the practice of hitbodedut, of secluded prayer each and every day. So with that, we are concluding today's session of our studies, and may we have the strength to practice our hitbodedut, to take our times of secluded introspection and prayer to God, and follow step by step the teachings of this Torah. With that, I would like to wish you a good continuation to your day, and with the help of God, our kollel will be meeting again tomorrow, Thursday, the 4th of August, 29th of Tammuz, at 4 p.m. Israel time. Look forward to having you with me. Here in the city of Jerusalem, the holy city of Yerushalayim. Shalom, shalom from Yerushalayim.
La 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 la.